Okay, so this is going to be a two-color study. I'm going to start here. I have my other experiments that I did just covered up with a sheet of paper so we're not distracted. And it's kind of nice sometimes to have your palette if it's clear on white paper. So I have some ultramarine blue here, and I'm going to add some raw umber. If you don't have raw umber, you could use yellow or red or really whatever else you want. So I'm going to put one on either side, and I'm going to start with a blended sort of gradient between the two colors just to fill the canvas with color. So I'm going to do ultramarine on the top and raw umber on the bottom, thinking that this is sort of like a landscape, and the ultramarine is representing the sky and the raw umber is the earth or ground. So my brush is damp and I'm getting a lot of paint on here, and I'm just coming in and smoothing it in. And so we're filling the whole canvas. And this technique, you know, you can call it a gradient, you can call it blending in, and you could go from dark to light or light to dark, and you're really just brushing on the paint on the canvas and making a lot of strokes to get it on there. You can always add more pigment, and if your brush is getting a little dry, I'll just dip it in water a little bit and then wipe it off a little on a paper towel so it's not too wet, because you can see when it gets too wet it starts picking up. So we want a nice even tone. I'm gonna go back down to like the center, and sometimes I go both ways to sort of fill up the canvas. So when I'm working with two colors, I sometimes have two brushes. I didn't like what was happening there, so I'm just wiping it up, and I'm gonna put a little more paint on here because it got a little too wet. So I'm gonna fill in this space, and then I put a lot of paint on the top, and then I'm just smoothing it out with my brush. Okay, I'm gonna use another brush just because I don't want to wash that, and this is also damp because I had cleaned it. And then I'm gonna fill in this paint on the bottom. This is the raw umber. So when I'm doing these color studies, I like to have some areas that are just the paint from the tube before I start mixing them, so that I can see what the color right out of the tube is. And I usually do those like in the corner. Okay, now to blend these, I'm just gonna start going up into this, and I'm blending right on the canvas. So this is the first way to mix paint, is mixing on the canvas and blending one color into another. And we'll also blend on the palette. And then I can take my blue brush and start blending down into the raw umber. So I can create this central area where they're blended together. And now while the paint is still wet, we can do some techniques, call it like a wipeout technique. And this is really common in indirect painting methods, where you're creating sort of like a sketch or a wash underneath. It's an underpainting, and you're creating the values in here, the darks and lights. And I'm using a paper towel, just have my sort of finger wrapped in here, and you could think of these like as clouds. And so the paint still needs to be wet when you're doing this, so have your paper towel ready. And so this is a way to get your values in place really quickly. So you get some paint down on the canvas, and then you're wiping away the highlights, like erasing the highlights. It's kind of fun to do. And then maybe there's like a river or something here, and you could make some, or there's highlights if this is water. You know, there could be, you could have all kinds of things going on. So I'm just gonna scrape out a couple areas for highlights so we can see what's happening there. And then I usually blend out the edges of my highlight areas, and then you can come back in and pick it up even more to make it really bright if you have a super bright highlight. So this is a way to start a painting, and it's called an underpainting in indirect painting techniques. And the technical terms for it are ebouche or eyebash. I know people say it differently. And, you know, it's like a painting sketch, or I always think of eyebash, ebouche, color wash, because they rhyme a little bit. So it's like a wash of color where you're getting your darks and lights in. There's also grisaille is another word that's used in painting. That's usually just black and gray. So think of like grayscale, grisaille. It could also be all brown. So it's usually just one color and then the whites pulled out. So this is a great way to get like the composition of your painting down really quickly, get your values in. And if you're doing the ebash, the color wash, you're also getting your color balanced really quickly. This is all about, remember, we're still working on the foundational stuff. This is all about starting. This is a great way to start a painting. You know, then what you would do is you would build up glazes of color, which I will show you how to do once this dries. You'd build up glazes of color to create something more realistic looking, to get the colors exactly where you want them to be. So you could start with, some people start with black and gray, some people start with brown, some people start with really bright, amazing colors. And then as the glazes are, you know, watery or have medium in them, so there's transparent. And then the light hits all the colors underneath. You're building up these layers, but they're transparent or translucent, and the light is hitting what's underneath, and it creates some amazing effects. This could be a little thicker of the paint. I see a lot of texture coming through, but that's fine. We're just getting started quickly. And so you would let this totally dry if you were gonna do glazing over it. But right now I want us to do just a couple more techniques, like test different brush strokes. Need a little more blue on here. I want you, since we did a lot of blendy techniques, I want you to test different brush strokes where, like, if this is going to be a, you know, reference canvas for you, you want to see how the ultramarine blue looks just right out of the tube. And like I said, I like to do that in the corners, so I know that's before I started blending too much. And then you can start blending it out into the white and seeing how that looks just right out of the tube. So try different brush strokes, short brush strokes. Try just, you know, getting a lot of paint on your brush and just like placing it down. You know, a thick layer of paint is going to look really different than if you're doing these like small kind of dabby brush strokes and blending them into the white area. So really, this is about experimenting. This is about figuring out how you like to create your paintings and trying all different techniques. Okay, I'm gonna come do the same thing with the raw umber out of the tube. I'm gonna get a lot of paint on my brush, and I'm gonna come in the corners and get like some really thick paint and then kind of dab it out, blend it out so we can see what it looks like blended in a little more and what it looks like when it's really a lot of opaque, not transparent paint. So this is the opaque paint out of the tube in the corners, and then I'm blending it a little bit with my brush. As I sort of lose paint on my paintbrush, I'm using that to blend it in to the white areas. And sometimes with underpaintings, you know, people will add white in here. There's really no like right or wrong way to do it. I like to just show you a lot of different techniques so you can try things, see what feels right to you. And, you know, even though I've been painting for a very long time, I'm always trying new things. I love teaching because it helps me be a beginner over and over again, have that beginner mindset, which I think is the best way to learn. And, you know, you're never gonna finish learning everything there is. There's so much to learn. So it's fun just to take advantage of that part of making art and keep trying new things. Okay, now I'm gonna do a mixture. I'm mixing on my palette. I've only been mixing on the canvas, but now I'm gonna do a mixture of the blue and raw umber so I can start to see what the mixing of the paint looks like. And blue, ultramarine blue and raw umber are one of my favorite combinations. I think they're great for landscapes and just starting off getting, you know, the cool and the neutral sort of warm tones. You can do a lot with this color. I'm gonna take some here and do a more raw umber version of this. And sometimes my paint is getting like goopy on my brush, so I'll just like wipe it off. You can wipe it off the sides like that if your paint. So I'll have more raw umber here, but still a little bit of blue on it so we can see what that looks like. And then I'm gonna come in with my blue brush that has blue already on it and do just a little bit of raw umber on there. So just to darken the blue a little bit, and we can see how that changes the color of the ultramarine. So just a tiny bit of raw umber mixed into this ultramarine is making it darker, maybe more moody, like a cloudy sky this would be good for. So I'm always thinking about different levels of the colors and what that looks like, and I'm making brush strokes and blending into my canvas. So when I use this as a reference and I go to paint, I can make my painting look the way I want it to look, and I don't have to spend a lot of time while I'm doing a more finished painting, like experimenting and guessing. I've done this experimental phase of my painting, and I keep these around while I'm painting so I can have an idea of how to mix the paint. And so I'm just adding different levels of blue and raw umber, and you know, this side has more raw umber on it, this side has more blue on it, so I'm just kind of then bringing them together. I'm mixing some on the palette and mixing some on the canvas. And so another important thing is to start to notice when the paint starts to dry how things are working, you know, and you might like some of the effects that are happening, but sometimes, let's see if I can make happen what I want to talk about. Sometimes the paint kind of starts picking up. I'm gonna get my brush wet. And let's say I was trying to like blend this. Sometimes it just starts to pick up, like almost erase, which is really great sometimes, but sometimes that might not be what you want. And it's like, if it's bothering you, you can try drying off your brush on a paper towel, or you can just let it dry the way it is. And then come back in a little bit. So try blending things, try the bold brush strokes where you're not blending, and then try adding a little water to your brush and blending. So I'm like doing circles, and then you could try little crosses and blending these edges where one color meets the canvas or one color meets another color. Try to have some blended edges, and then there's some really sharp, like this is a more sharp edge. And then this would be like a more blended edge next to it, just to see what those look like. So you're creating all these different situations, right, on your canvas, so that when you go to paint, you'll know what it's gonna look like. And then if you're working on it and it got all muddy, like too mixed together, I mean, the raw umber does look like actual mud, but if you don't like I don't like what happened there, you could just come in with your paper towel and pick it up. And you can also dab it like this to make some cool effects. So take time to fill in this painting with two colors. try the technique of this underpainting where you're like lifting up, and then make sure there's some areas that have the straight out of the tube. I think that got kind of lost. So I'm like reinforcing the straight out of the tube color and kind of blending it in to the sides here so I can see what that color will do right when I grab it out of the tube. And I want to do that with bring some of the raw umber back too. So I'm going to get this paintbrush dry, and you can kind of feel it of how dry it is. I'm going to dip into some of this raw umber and come back over and just in the corners do my... Now this isn't supposed to look like anything. Remember, it's an exercise. We're just testing how the paint mixes and how the paint works. Just gonna bring back some of this. Okay, and then make sure to label these before you forget. So we have ultramarine and raw umber. You can also label it on the back of the canvas, and actually having a piece of paper here is good to make notes on, so that you know what you did, because it's easy to forget and sometimes you can look at it and have no idea. So just take the notes before you move on to the next thing, and take some time to clean off your brushes, clean off your palette. If you have extra paint, you can use it in the next step too. So what I do when I want to save some paint but I need to clean my palette is I get the good stuff and I kind of put it in the corner, and then I'll wipe off the rest of my palette. So any paint I want to keep, put it up in the corner, and then I'll wipe down. There's a lot more here. And then I'll wipe down this or take it to the sink. And then I'm gonna wash my brushes out and change the water so I have some clean water for the next painting. Even if you're not gonna do a 3-color painting, I recommend that you watch the demo so you understand how that all works.